Skol Vikings, let's win this game.
Attention Vikings fans. The Vikings have suddenly found themselves at the center of four very different storylines. One involves a quarterback contingency plan that nobody was talking about a few months ago. Another centers around speculation involving one of the most important players this franchise has ever had. Brian Flores is making it clear that a new addition to his defense is already earning serious respect inside the building. And J.J. McCarthy has finally addressed the rumors surrounding his future in Minnesota. On their own, these are just off-season headlines. Together, they may offer a glimpse into where this franchise is really headed. You can feel the uncertainty whenever the quarterback room gets brought up. Not panic, not desperation, just uncertainty. Because for the first time in a while, there are multiple paths this thing could take. Minnesota enters the season with Kyler Murray, Carson Wentz, and J.J. McCarthy in the room, and every one of those names carries a different level of intrigue. Murray arrived with something to prove. Wentz brings experience. McCarthy is still trying to convince everyone he can become the long-term answer. And that uncertainty has now opened the door to another conversation that few Vikings fans expected to hear. Baker Mayfield. The veteran quarterback was recently mentioned as a possible contingency option down the road if things fail to stabilize in Minnesota. Reports suggest Mayfield and Tampa Bay remain far apart on extension talks, and naturally Vikings fans started connecting dots. Now let's be clear, this is not something happening tomorrow. It doesn't even feel particularly likely right now, but it does fit a pattern we've seen throughout Vikings history. This franchise has never been afraid to bring in veteran quarterbacks when needed. The Brett Favre move, the Kirk Cousins era. Even now with Kyler Murray entering the picture, Minnesota has always been willing to chase stability at the most important position in sports. And that's really what this conversation is about, stability. Because J.J. McCarthy still hasn't fully established himself. Injuries have interrupted his development. Consistency hasn't always been there. And Vikings fans know this organization cannot afford another wasted season while waiting for answers. Every year spent searching for a quarterback affects everything else on the roster. Meanwhile, there is another under-the-radar story developing at OTAs that deserves attention. Undrafted rookie Dillon continues turning heads. Reports say Kyler Murray has repeatedly targeted Bell during practices, and that's the kind of connection coaches notice quickly. Minnesota's top three receivers are elite, but depth remains a concern. The opportunity behind them is very real. That WR4 spot is absolutely available for someone willing to grab it. Bell appears determined to make this roster conversation a lot more interesting than expected. It might only be June, but Vikings fans know surprise contributors often announce themselves long before the regular season begins. There are rumors. Then there are rumors that make Vikings fans stop scrolling and stare at the screen for a second. This falls into the second category, because when the future of a superstar gets mentioned, emotions immediately get involved. Recently, speculation surfaced about a scenario where Minnesota could eventually consider moving Justin Jefferson if the quarterback situation remains unresolved beyond the next couple of seasons. Take a breath. Nobody is saying this is happening now. Nobody inside the organization is pushing this idea. In fact, trading Jefferson anytime soon makes almost no sense. He's still one of the most dominant receivers in football. He's still the centerpiece of the offense. And quite frankly, he's the type of player you spend years hoping to find. But the reason this conversation exists is because football can be ruthless. If Minnesota cannot solve quarterback long-term, difficult decisions eventually arrive. That's what analysts are looking at when they discuss hypothetical blockbuster trades. Jefferson would immediately become one of the most valuable assets in the entire NFL. The draft compensation could be enormous. The ability to move up for a future franchise quarterback could become significantly easier. That's why these conversations keep resurfacing, even when nobody wants to have them. From a cold football perspective, people understand why the discussion exists. From an emotional Vikings fan perspective, it's a completely different story. This fan base has watched Jefferson carry offenses through instability. Different quarterbacks, different circumstances, different challenges, yet every year he keeps producing. He keeps making impossible catches look routine. He keeps giving fans a reason to believe. That's why even hearing his name connected to trade speculation feels uncomfortable. There is also another layer to this. Jefferson wants to win. Every great player does. He's already spent years dealing with quarterback turnover and uncertainty. If Minnesota struggles again and finds itself starting over at quarterback once more, those conversations could become louder. Not because Jefferson doesn't love the Vikings, not because the Vikings don't value him, but because championship windows don't stay open forever. The encouraging part is that all of this remains hypothetical today. The reality is simple. The Vikings need either Kyler Murray or J.J. McCarthy to emerge. If one of them does, nearly all of these trade theories lose their foundation. question. Until that answer arrives, though, the speculation will continue to linger in the background, and that's what makes this storyline impossible to completely ignore. One thing that often gets overlooked during the offseason is how important depth becomes once injuries start hitting. Every season, teams talk about stars. Every season, championships get influenced by role players. That's why Brian Flores' recent comments caught my attention. The defensive coordinator didn't just compliment a new addition. He sounded genuinely excited about what he sees developing. The player drawing that praise is James Pierre. Minnesota signed the veteran cornerback this offseason because the room desperately needed reinforcement behind Byron Murphy Jr. and Isaiah Rodgers Sr. Before Pierre arrived, the depth chart felt dangerously thin. One injury could have changed the entire conversation surrounding the secondary. That's no longer the case. Flores described Pierre as a true professional, a veteran who brings maturity, preparation, chemistry, and reliability. Those words matter when they come from a coach who demands as much as Flores does. This isn't someone handing out compliments for the sake of being nice. Flores has coached enough defensive backs to recognize players who understand what it takes to survive in this league. What stood out even more was hearing about Pierre's connection with Josh Metellus. Those relationships matter inside locker rooms. Teams don't just win because of talent. They win because players trust each other when adversity hits. Pierre seems to be building that trust quickly. And while fans focus heavily on quarterbacks right now, the Vikings defense remains a huge part of this team's identity moving forward. Flores has consistently gotten more out of players than many expected. If Pierre becomes the reliable CB3 Minnesota hopes he can be, it gives the defense flexibility and stability that wasn't guaranteed a few months ago. That may not dominate headlines, but those kinds of additions often matter when games start carrying playoff implications. At the same time, General Manager Nolan Teasley addressed the quarterback competition and didn't shy away from the reality of it. He called the room deep, competitive, and full of talent. More importantly, he emphasized the developmental environment Kevin O'Connell provides. Then came the comments about Kyler Murray. Teasley believes there is still untapped potential there. That's a fascinating statement, because if he's right, and if O'Connell truly unlocks another level of Murray's game, the entire direction of this franchise could change faster than many expect. Suddenly, questions that dominate today's headlines might look very different a few months from now. The possibility is exciting. The uncertainty remains real. And that's exactly why Vikings fans keep watching every practice report so closely. Sometimes the most revealing moments don't happen during games. They happen when a player sits in front of a microphone and speaks from the heart. That's exactly what happened when questions surfaced regarding J.J. McCarthy and recent trade speculation. Ever since Kyler Murray arrived, there has been an obvious cloud hanging over the former first-round pick. Fair or unfair, fans want answers. Coaches want answers. The organization wants answers. Can McCarthy become the quarterback they envisioned when they drafted him? Or has the timeline changed? Instead of avoiding the topic, McCarthy addressed it directly, and honestly, his response sounded genuine. He made it clear he wants to be in Minnesota. He wants to be part of this organization. He believes he can thrive in Kevin O'Connell's system. And perhaps most importantly, he sounded like someone who still believes his story with the Vikings is far from finished. That's not insignificant. Remember, this is a player who famously told O'Connell before the draft that he'd run through a brick wall for him. That level of belief doesn't disappear overnight. The challenge is that belief must eventually become production. The NFL is ruthless that way. Fans can appreciate loyalty, coaches can appreciate commitment, but quarterbacks ultimately get judged by results. That's why the upcoming competition feels so important. Murray enters with experience and upside. McCarthy enters fighting for his future. Neither path is guaranteed, and that's what makes this one of the most fascinating storylines in the entire league. A breakout season from McCarthy changes the long-term outlook of the franchise. A rejuvenated version of Murray changes it too. Even a neck-and-neck battle throughout camp would create difficult decisions for the coaching staff. Every possible outcome carries significant consequences. That's why his comments resonated with so many fans. Not because they answered every question, but because they reminded everyone that McCarthy hasn't given up on becoming the quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings. Not even close. Now comes the hardest part, turning belief into results when the lights come on and the pressure starts building. At the end of the day, that's what makes this team so fascinating right now. There are questions everywhere, but there is also hope everywhere. Hope that Kyler Murray finds another level. Hope that J.J. McCarthy proves he belongs. Hope that young players like Dillon emerge. Hope that veterans like James Pierre strengthen this defense. And hope that Justin Jefferson continues leading this franchise toward bigger goals. Vikings Nation has lived through uncertainty before. We've lived through heartbreak before. But we've also seen seasons nobody expected become unforgettable. So out of all these storylines, which one are you watching most closely? Let me know in the comments. As always, we'll keep following every twist and turn together. Stay tuned. Skol Vikings, let's go.